Chapter 10 of the Golden Bough. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Månsbro. The Golden Bough by Sir James Frazer. Chapter 10. Relics of Tree Worship in Modern Europe. From the foregoing review of the beneficent qualities commonly ascribed to tree spirits, it is easy to understand why customs like the May tree or Maypole have prevailed so widely and figured so prominently in the popular festivals of European peasants. In spring or early summer, or even on Midsummer Day, it was and still is in many parts of Europe the custom to go out to the woods, cut down a tree and bring it into the village, where it is set up amid general rejoicings. Or the people cut branches in the woods and fasten them on every house. The intention of these customs is to bring home to the village and to each house the blessings which the tree spirits has in its power to bestow. Hence the custom in some places of planting a May tree before every house, or of carrying the village May tree from door to door, that every household may receive its share of the blessing. Out of the mass of evidence on this subject, a few examples may be selected. Sir Henry Pierce, in his Description of Westmeath, writing in 1682, says, "On May Eve every family sets up before their door a green bush, strewed over with yellow flowers, which the meadows yield plentifully. In countries where timber is plentiful, they erect tall slender trees, which stand high, and they continue almost the whole year, so as a stranger should go nigh to imagine that they were all signs of ale cellars, and that all houses were ale houses. In Northamptonshire, a young tree 10 or 12 feet high used to be planted before each house on May Day, so as to appear growing. Flowers were thrown over it and strewn about the door. Among ancient customs still retained by the Cornish may be reckoned that of decking their doors and porches on the 1st of May with green boughs of sycamore and hawthorn, and of planting trees, or rather stumps of trees, before their houses. In the north of England it was formerly the custom for young people to rise a little after midnight on the morning of the 1st of May, and go out with music and the blowing of horns into the woods, where they broke branches and adorned them with nosegays and crowns of flowers. This done, they returned about sunrise and fastened the flower-decked branches over the doors and windows of their houses. At Abingdon, in Berkshire, young people formerly went about in groups on May morning, singing a carol of which the following are two of the verses. We've been rambling all the night, and some time of this day, and now we returning back again, we bring a garland gay. A garland gay we bring you here, and at your door we stand. It is a sprout well budded out, the work of our Lord's hand. At the towns of Saffold Walden and Debden in Essex, on the 1st of May, little girls go about in parties from door to door, singing a song almost identical with the above, and carrying garlands. A doll dressed in white is usually placed in the middle of each garland. Similar customs have been, and indeed are still observed in various parts of England. The garlands are generally in the form of hoops intersecting each other at right angles. It appears that a hoop wreathed with rowan and March marigold, and bearing suspended within it 2 balls, is still carried on May Day by villagers in some parts of Ireland. The balls, which are sometimes covered with gold and silver paper, are said to have originally represented the sun and moon. In some villages of the Vosges Mountains, on the 1st Sunday of May, young girls go in bands from house to house singing a song in praise of May, in which mention is made of the bread and meal that come in May. If money is given them, they fasten a green bough to the door. If it is refused, they wish the family many children and no bread to feed them. In the French department of Mayenne, boys who bore the name of Maillotins used to go about from farm to farm on the 1st of May singing carols, for which they received money or a drink. They planted a small tree or a branch of a tree. Near Saverne in Alsace, bands of people go about carrying May trees. Among them is a man dressed in a white shirt with his face blackened. In front of him is carried a large May tree, but each member of the band also carries a smaller one. One of the company bears a huge basket, in which he collects eggs, bacon, and so forth. On the Thursday before Whitsunday, the Russian villagers go out into the woods, sing songs, weave garlands, and cut down a young birch tree, which they dress up in women's clothes, or adorn with many-colored shreds and ribbons. After that comes a feast, at the end of which they take the dressed-up birch tree, carry it home to their village with joyful dance and song, and set it up in one of the houses, where it remains as an honoured guest till Whitsunday. On the 2 intervening days they pay visits to the house where their guest is, but on the 3rd day, Whitsunday, they take her to a stream and fling her into its waters, throwing their garlands after her. In this Russian custom, the dressing of the birch in woman's clothes shows how clearly the tree is personified, and the throwing it into a stream is most probably a rain charm. In some parts of Sweden, on the eve of May Day, lads go about carrying each a bunch of fresh birch twigs wholly or partly in leaf. With the village fiddler at their head, they make the round of the houses singing May songs. The burden of their songs is a prayer for fine weather, a plentiful harvest, and worldly and spiritual blessings. One of them carries a basket in which he collects gifts of eggs and the like. If they are well received, they stick a leafy twig in the roof over the cottage door. But in Sweden, midsummer is the season when these ceremonies are chiefly observed. On the eve of St. John, the 23rd of June, the houses are thoroughly cleansed and garnished with green boughs and flowers. Young fir trees are raised at the doorway and elsewhere about the homestead, and very often small umbrageous arbours are constructed in the garden. In Stockholm, on this day, a leaf market is held at which thousands of maypoles, majstänger, from 6 inches to 12 feet high, decorated with leaves, flowers, slips of coloured paper, gilt eggshells strung on reeds, and so on, are exposed for sale. Bonfires are lit on the hills, and the people dance around them and jump over them. But the chief event of the day is setting up the maypole. This consists of a straight and tall spruce pine tree, stripped of its branches. At times hoops and other pieces of wood, placed crosswise, are attached to it at intervals, whilst at others it is provided with bows, representing, so to say, a man with his arms akimbo. From top to bottom, not only the majstång, maypole itself, but the hoops, bows, etc., are ornamented with leaves, flowers, slips of various cloth, gilt eggshells, etc., and on the top of it is a large vase, or it may be a flag. The raising of the maypole, the decoration of which is done by the village maidens, is an affair of much ceremony. The people flock to it from all quarters, and dance around it in a great ring. Midsummer customs of the same sort used to be observed in some parts of Germany. Thus in the towns of the upper Harz mountains, tall fir trees, with the bark peeled off their lower trunks, were set up in open places and decked with flowers and eggs, which were painted yellow and red. Round these trees the young folk danced by day and the old folk in the evening. In some parts of Bohemia also, a maypole or midsummer tree is erected on St. John's Eve. The lads fetch a tall fir or pine from the wood and set it up on a height, where the girls deck it with nosegays, garlands, and red ribbons. It is afterwards burned. It would be needless to illustrate at length the custom which has prevailed in various parts of Europe, such as England, France, and Germany, of setting up a village May tree or maypole on May Day. A few examples will suffice. The puritanical writer Philip Stubbs, in his Anatomy of Abuses, first published at London in 1583, has described with manifest disgust how they used to bring in the maypole in the days of good Queen Bess. His description affords us a vivid glimpse into merry England in the older time. Against May, Whitsunday, or other time, all the young men and maids, old men and wives, run gadding overnight to the woods, groves, hills, and mountains, where they spend all the night in pleasant pastimes, and in the morning they return, bringing with them birch and branches of trees, to deck their assemblies withal. And no marvel, for there is a great lord present amongst them, as superintendent and lord over their pastimes and sports, namely Satan, prince of hell. But the chiefest jewel they bring from thence is their maypole, which they bring home with great veneration, as thus. They have 20 or 40 yoke of oxen, each ox having a sweet nosegay of flowers placed on the tip of his horns, and these oxen draw home this maypole, this stinking idol rather, which is covered all over with flowers and herbs, bound round about with strings, from the top to the bottom, and sometime painted with various colours, with 200 or 300 men, women, and children following it with great devotion, and thus being reared up, with handkerchiefs and flags hovering on the top, they straw the ground round about, bind green boughs round it, set up summer halls, bowers, and arbours hard by it. And then fall they to dance about it, like as the heathen people did at the dedication of the idols, whereof this is a perfect pattern, or rather the thing itself. I have heard it credibly reported, and that viva voce, by men of great gravity and reputation, that of 40, 60, or 100 maids going to the wood overnight, there have scarcely the third part of them returned home again undefiled. In Swabia, on the 1st of May, a tall fir tree used to be fetched into the village, where it was decked with ribbons and set up. Then the people danced around it merrily to music. The tree stood on the village green the whole year throughout, until a fresh tree was brought in next May Day. In Saxony, people were not content with bringing the summer symbolically, as king or queen, into the village. They brought the fresh green itself from the woods even into the houses, that is, the May or Whitsuntide trees, which are mentioned in documents from the 13th century onwards. The fetching in of the May tree was also a festival. The people went out into the woods to seek the May, Maium guerere, brought young trees, especially firs and birches, to the village and set them up before the doors of the houses or of the cattle stalls or in the rooms. Young fellows erected such May trees, as we have already said, before the chambers of their sweethearts. Besides these household Mays, a great May tree or May pole, which had also been brought in solemn procession to the village, was set up in the middle of the village or in the marketplace of the town. It had been chosen by the whole community, who watched over it most carefully. Generally the tree was stripped of its branches and leaves, nothing but the crown being left, on which were displayed, in addition to many coloured ribbons and cloths, a variety of victuals such as sausages, cakes, and eggs. The young folk exerted themselves to obtain these prizes. In the greasy poles, which are still to be seen at our fairs, we have a relic of these old maypoles. Not uncommonly there was a race on foot or on horseback to the May tree, a Whitsunday pastime which in course of time has been divested of its goal and survives as a popular custom to this day in many parts of Germany. At Bordeaux, on the 1st of May, the boys of each street used to erect in it a maypole, which they adorned with garlands and a great crown, and every evening during the whole of the month the young people of both sexes danced singing about the pole. Down to the present day, May trees decked with flowers and ribbons are set up on May Day in every village and hamlet of gay Provence. Under them the young folk make merry and the old folk rest. In all these cases, apparently, the custom is or was to bring in a new May tree each year. However, in England the village maypole seems as a rule, at least in later times, to have been permanent, not renewed annually. Villages of Upper Bavaria renew their maypole once every 3, 4, or 5 years. It is a fir tree fetched from the forest, and amid all the wreaths, flags, and inscriptions with which it is bedecked, an essential part is the bunch of dark green foliage left at the top, as a memento that in it we have to do, not without a dead pole, but with a living tree from the greenwood. We can hardly doubt that originally the practice everywhere was to set up a new May tree every year. As the object of the custom was to bring in the fructifying spirit of vegetation, newly awakened in spring, the end would have been defeated if, instead of a living tree, green and sappy, an old wither one had been erected year after year, or allowed to stand permanently. When, however, the meaning of the custom had been forgotten, and the May tree was regarded simply as a centre for holiday merrymaking, people saw no reason for felling a fresh tree every year, and preferred to let the same tree stand permanently, only decking it with fresh flowers on May Day. But even when the maypole had thus become a fixture, the need of giving it the appearance of being a green tree, not a dead pole, was sometimes felt. Thus at Weaverham in Cheshire are 2 maypoles, which are decorated on this day, May Day, with all due attention to the ancient solemnity. The sides are hung with garlands, and the top terminated by a birch or other tall slender tree with its leaves on, the bark being peeled and the stem spliced to the pole, so as to give the appearance of one tree from the summit. Thus the renewal of the May tree is like the renewal of the harvest May. Each is intended to secure a fresh portion of the fertilizing spirit of vegetation, and to preserve it throughout the year. But whereas the efficacy of the harvest May is restricted to promoting the growth of the crops, that of the May tree or May branch extends also, as we have seen, to women and cattle. Lastly, it is worth noting that the old May tree is sometimes burned at the end of the year. Thus in the district of Prague, young people break pieces of the public May tree and place them behind the holy pictures in their rooms, where they remain till next May Day, and are then burned on the hearth. In Württemberg, the bushes which are set up on the houses on Palm Sunday are sometimes left there for a year and then burnt. So much for the tree spirit conceived as incorporate or immanent in the tree. We have now to show that the tree spirit is often conceived and represented as detached from the tree and clothed in human form, or even as embodied in living men or women. The evidence for this anthropomorphic representation of the tree spirit is largely to be found in the popular customs of European peasantry. There is an instructive class of cases in which the tree spirit is represented simultaneously in vegetable form and in human form, which are set side by side as if for the express purpose of explaining each other. In these cases the human representative of the tree spirit is sometimes a doll or puppet, sometimes a living person, but whether a puppet or a person, it is placed beside a tree or bough, so that together the person or puppet and the tree or bough form a sort of bilingual inscription, the one being, so to speak, a translation of the other. Here, therefore, there is no room left for doubt that the spirit of the tree is actually represented in human form. Thus in Bohemia, on the fourth Sunday in Lent, young people throw a puppet called Death into the water. Then the girls go into the wood, cut down a young tree, and fasten it to a puppet dressed in white clothes to look like a woman. With this tree and puppet they go from house to house collecting gratuities and singing songs with the refrain, "We carry Death out of the village, we bring summer into the village." Here, as we shall see later on, the summer is the spirit of vegetation returning or reviving in spring. In some parts of our own country children go about asking for pence with some small imitations of maypoles, and with a finely dressed doll which they call the Lady of the May. In these cases the tree and the puppet are obviously regarded as equivalent. At Thun in Alsace, a girl called the Little May Rose, dressed in white, carries a small May tree, which is gay with garlands and ribbons. Her companions collect gifts from door to door, singing a song. "Little May Rose, turn round 3 times, let us look at you round and round. Rose of the May, come to the Greenland away, we will be merry all. So we go from the May to the roses." In the course of the song a wish is expressed that those who give nothing may lose their fowls by the marten. Their vine may bear no clusters, their tree no nuts, their field no corn. The produce of the year is supposed to depend on the gifts offered to these May singers. Here and in the cases mentioned above, where children go about with green boughs or garlands on May Day singing and collecting money, the meaning is that with the spirit of vegetation they bring plenty and good luck to the house, and they expect to be paid for the service. In Russian Lithuania, on the 1st of May, they used to set up a green tree before the village. Then the rustic swains chose the prettiest girl, crowned her, swathed her in birch branches, and set her beside the May tree, where they danced, sang, and shouted, "O May! O May!" In Brie, Île-de-France, a May tree is erected in the midst of the village, its top is crowned with flowers, lower down it is twined with leaves and twigs, still lower with huge green branches. The girls dance around it, and at the same time a lad wrapped in leaves and called Father May is led about. In small towns of the Frankenwald mountains in northern Bavaria, on the 2nd of May, a Walber tree is erected before a tavern, and a man dances around it, enveloped in straw from head to foot in such a way that the ears of corn unite above his head to form a crown. He is called the Walber, and used to be led in procession through the streets, which were adorned with sprigs of birch. Among the Slavs of Carinthia, on St. George's Day, the 23rd of April, the young people deck with flowers and garlands a tree which has been felled on the eve of the festival. The tree is then carried in procession, accompanied with music and joyful acclamations, the chief figure in the procession being the Green George, a young fellow clad from head to foot in green birch branches. At the close of the ceremonies, the Green George, that is, an effigy of him, is thrown into the water. It is the aim of the lad who acts Green George to step out of his leafy envelope and substitute the effigy so adroitly that no one shall perceive the change. In many places, however, the lad himself who plays the part of Green George is ducked in a river or pond, with the express intention of thus ensuing rain to make the fields and meadows green in summer. In some places the cattle are crowned and driven from their stalls to the accompaniment of a song. Green George we bring, Green George we accompany, may he feed our herds well if not to the water with him. Here we see that the same powers of making rain and fostering the cattle, which are described to the tree spirit regarded as incorporate in the tree, are also attributed to the tree spirit represented by a living man. Among the gypsies of Transylvania and Romania, the festival of Green George is the chief celebration of spring. Some of them keep it on Easter Monday, others on St. George's Day, the 23rd of April. On the eve of the festival a young willow tree is cut down, adorned with garlands and leaves, and set up in the ground. Women with child place one of their garments under the tree and leave it there overnight. If next morning they find a leaf of the tree lying over the garment, they know that their delivery will be easy. Sick and old people go to the tree in the evening, spit on it thrice, and say, "You will soon die, but let us live." Next morning the gypsies gather about the willow. The chief figure of the festival is Green George, a lad who is concealed from top to toe in green leaves and blossoms. He throws a few handfuls of grass to the beasts of the tribe, in order that they may have no lack of fodder throughout the year. Then he takes 3 iron nails, which have lain for 3 days and nights in water, and knocks them into the willow, after which he pulls them out and flings them into a running stream to propitiate the water spirits. Finally, a pretence is made of throwing Green George into the water, but in fact it is only a puppet made of branches and leaves, which is ducked in the stream. In this version of the custom, the powers of granting an easy delivery to women and of communicating vital energy to the sick and old are clearly ascribed to the willow, while Green George, the human double of the tree, bestows food on the cattle, and further ensures the favour of the water spirits by putting them in indirect communication with the tree. Without citing more examples to the same effect, we may sum up the results of the preceding pages in the words of Mannhardt. The customs quoted suffice to establish with certainty the conclusion that in these spring processions the spirit of vegetation is often represented both by the May tree and in addition by a man dressed in green leaves or flowers or by a girl similarly adorned. It is the same spirit which animates the tree and is active in the inferior plants and which we have recognized in the May tree and the harvest May. Quite consistently, the spirit is also supposed to manifest his presence in the first flower of spring and reveals himself both in a girl representing a May rose and also, as giver of harvest, in the person of the Valber. The procession with this representative of the divinity was supposed to produce the same beneficial effects on the fowls, the fruit trees, and the crops as the presence of the deity himself. In other words, the mummer was regarded not as an image but as an actual representative of the spirit of vegetation. Hence the wish expressed by the attendants on the May rose and May tree that those who refuse them gifts of eggs, bacon, and so forth may have no share in the blessings which it is in the power of the itinerant spirit to bestow. We may conclude that these begging processions with May trees or May boughs from door to door, bringing the May or the summer, had everywhere originally a serious and, so to speak, sacramental significance. People really believed that the god of growth was present unseen in the bough. By the procession he was brought to each house to bestow his blessing. The names May, Father May, May Lady, Queen of the May, by which the anthropomorphic spirit of vegetation is often denoted, show that the idea of the spirit of vegetation is blent with the personification of the season, at which his powers are most strikingly manifested. So far we have seen that the tree spirit, or the spirit of vegetation, in general is represented either in vegetable form alone, as by a tree, bough, or flower, or in vegetable and human form simultaneously, as by a tree, bough, or flower in combination with a puppet or a living person. It remains to show that the representation of him by a tree, bough, or flower is sometimes entirely dropped, while the representation of him by a living person remains. In this case, the representative character of the person is generally marked by dressing him or her in leaves or flowers. Sometimes, too, it is indicated by the name he or she bears. Thus, in some parts of Russia on St. George's Day, the 23rd of April, a youth is dressed out, like our Jack in the Green, with leaves and flowers. The Slovenes call him the Green George. Holding a lighted torch in one hand and a pie in the other, he goes out to the cornfields, followed by girls singing appropriate songs. A circle of brushwood is next lighted, in the middle of which is set the pie. All who take part in the ceremony then sit down around the fire and divide the pie among them. In this custom the Green George, dressed in leaves and flowers, is plainly identical with the similarly disguised Green George who is associated with the tree in the Carinthian, Transylvanian, and Romanian customs observed on the same day. Again, we saw that in Russia at Whitsuntide a birch tree is dressed in women's clothes and set up in the house. Clearly equivalent to this is the custom observed on Whit Monday by Russian girls in the district of Pinsk. They choose the prettiest of their number, envelop her in a mass of foliage taken from the birch trees and maples, and carry her about through the village. In Rula, as soon as the trees begin to grow green in spring, the children assemble on a Sunday and go out into the woods, where they choose one of their playmates to be the little leaf man. They break branches from the trees and twine them about the child till only his shoes peep out from the leafy mantle. Holes are made in it for him to see through, and two of the children lead the little leaf man, that he may not stumble or fall. Singing and dancing they take him from house to house, asking for gifts of food such as eggs, cream, sausages, and cakes. Lastly, they sprinkle the leaf man with water and feast on the food they have collected. In the Fricktal, Switzerland, at Whitsuntide, boys go out into a wood and swathe one of their numbers in leafy boughs. He is called the Whitsuntide lout, and being mounted on horseback with a green branch in his hand, he is led back into the village. At the village well a halt is called, and the leaf-clad lout is dismounted and ducked in the trough. Thereby he acquires the right of sprinkling water on everybody, and he exercises the right especially on girls and street urchins. The urchins march before him in bands, begging him to give them a Whitsuntide wetting. In England, the best known example of these leaf-clad mummers is the Jack in the Green, a chimney sweeper who walks encased in a pyramidal framework of wickerwork, which is covered with holly and ivy, and surmounted by a crown of flowers and ribbons. Thus arrayed, he dances on May Day at the head of a troop of chimney sweeps, who collect pence. In Fricktal, a similar frame of basket work is called a Whitsuntide basket. As soon as the trees begin to bud, a spot is chosen in the wood, and here the village lads make the frame with all secrecy, lest others should forestall them. Leafy branches are twined round two hoops, one of which rests on the shoulders of the wearer, the other encircles his claves. Holes are made for his eyes and mouth, and a large nosegay crowns the whole. In this guise he appears suddenly in the village at the hour of vespers, preceded by 3 boys blowing on horns made of willow bark. The great object of his supporters is to set up the Whitsuntide basket on the village well, and to keep it and him there, despite the efforts of the lads from neighbouring villages, who seek to carry off the Whitsuntide basket and set it up on their own well. In the class of cases of which the foregoing are specimens, it is obvious that the leaf-clad person who is led about is equivalent to the May-tree, May-bough, or May-doll, which is carried from house to house by children begging. Both are representatives of the beneficent spirit of vegetation, whose visit to the house is recompensed by a present of money or food. Often the leaf-clad person who represents the spirit of vegetation is known as the king or the queen. Thus, for example, he or she is called the May King, Whitsuntide King, Queen of May, and so on. These titles, as Mannhardt observes, imply that the spirit incorporate in vegetation is a ruler, whose creative power extends far and wide. In a village near Salzwedel, a May tree is set up at Whitsuntide, and the boys race to it. He who reaches it first is king, a garland of flowers is put around his neck, and in his hand he carries a May bush, with which, as the procession moves along, he sweeps away the dew. At each house they sing a song, wishing the inmates good luck, referring to the black cow in the stall milking white milk, black hen on the nest laying white eggs, and begging a gift of eggs, bacon, and so on. At the village of Elgot in Silesia, a ceremony called the King's Race is observed at Whitsuntide. A pole with a cloth tied to it is set up in the meadow, and the young men ride past it on horseback, each trying to snatch away the cloth as he gallops by. The one who succeeds in carrying it off and dipping it in the neighbouring order is proclaimed king. Here the pole is clearly a substitute for a May tree. In some villages of Brunswick at Whitsuntide a May king is completely enveloped in a May bush. In some parts of Thüringen also they have a May king at Whitsuntide, but he is dressed up rather differently. A frame of wood is made in which a man can stand. It is completely covered with birch boughs and is surmounted by a crown of birch and flowers, in which a bell is fastened. This frame is placed in the wood and the May king gets into it. The rest go out and look for him, and when they have found him they lead him back into the village to the magistrate, the clergyman and others, who have to guess who is in the verdurous frame. If they guess wrong, the May king rings his bell by shaking his head, and a forfeit of beer or the like must be paid by the unsuccessful guesser. At Varstedt, the boys at Whitsuntide choose by lot a king and a high steward. The latter is completely concealed in a May bush, wears a wooden crown wreathen with flowers, and carries a wooden sword. The king, on the other hand, is only distinguished by a nosegay in his cap and a reed with a red ribbon tied to it in his hand. They beg for eggs from house to house, threatening that where none are given, none will be laid by the hens throughout the year. In this custom the high steward appears, for some reason, to have usurped the insignia of the king. At Hildesheim 5 or 6 young fellows go about on the afternoon of Whit Monday, cracking long whips in measured time and collecting eggs from the houses. The chief person of the band is the Leaf King, a lad swathed so completely in birchen twigs that nothing of him can be seen but his feet. A huge headdress of birchen twigs adds to his apparent stature. In his hand he carries a long crook, with which he tries to catch stray dogs and children. In some parts of Bohemia on Whit Monday, the young fellows disguise themselves in tall caps of birch bark adorned with flowers. One of them is dressed as a king and dragged on a sledge to the village green, and if on the way they pass a pool, the sledge is always overturned into it. Arrived at the green, they gather round the king. The crier jumps on a stone or climbs up on a tree and recites lampoons about each house and its inmates. Afterwards the disguises of bark are stripped off, and they go about the village in holiday attire, carrying a May tree and begging. Cakes, eggs, and corn are sometimes given them. At Grossvargula, near Langensalza, in the 18th century, a grass king used to be led about in procession at Whitsuntide. He was encased in a pyramid of poplar branches, the top of which was adorned with a royal crown of branches and flowers. He rode on horseback, with the leafy pyramid over him, so that its lower end touched the ground, and an opening was left in it only for his face. Surrounded by a cavalcade of young fellows, he rode in procession to the town hall, the parsonage, and so on, where they all got a drink of beer. Then, under the 7 lindens of the neighbouring Sommerberg, the grass king was stripped of his green casing, the crown was handed to the mayor, and the branches were stuck in the flax fields in order to make the flax grow tall. In this last trait the fertilizing influence ascribed to the representative of the tree spirit comes out clearly. In the neighbourhood of Pilsen, Bohemia, a conical hut of green branches without any door is erected at Whitsuntide in the midst of the village. To this hut rides a troop of village lads with the king at their head. He wears a sword at his side and a sugarloaf hat of rushes on his head. In his train are a judge, a crier, and a personage called a frog flayer or hangman. This last is a sort of ragged Merry Andrew, wearing a rusty old sword and bestriding a sorry hack. On reaching the hut, the crier dismounts and goes around it looking for a door. Finding none, he says, "Ah, this is perhaps an enchanted castle. The witches creep through the leaves and need no door." At last he draws his sword and hews his way into the hut, where there is a chair, on which he seats himself and proceeds to criticize in rhyme the girls, farmers, and farm servants of the neighbourhood. When this is over, the frog flayer steps forward and, after exhibiting a cage with frogs in it, sets up a gallows on which he hangs the frogs in a row. In the neighbourhood of Plas, the ceremony differs in some points. The king and his soldiers are completely clad in bark, adorned with flowers and ribbons. They all carry swords and ride horses, which are gay with green branches and flowers. While the village dames and girls are being criticized at the arbour, a frog is secretly pinched and poked by the crier till it quacks. Sentence of death is passed on the frog by the king, The hangman beheads it and flings the bleeding body among the spectators. Lastly, the king is driven from the hut and pursued by the soldiers. The pinching and beheading of the frog are doubtless, as Mannhardt observes, a rain charm. We have seen that some Indians of the Orinoco beat frogs for the express purpose of producing rain, and that killing a frog is a European rain charm. Often the spirit of vegetation in spring is represented by a queen instead of a king. In the neighbourhood of Libčović, Bohemia, on the first Sunday in Lent, girls dressed in white and wearing the first spring flowers, as violets and daisies, in their hair, lead about the village a girl who is called a queen and is crowned with flowers. During the procession, which is conducted with great solemnity, none of the girls may stand still, but must keep whirling round continually and singing. In every house the queen announces the arrival of spring and wishes the inmates good luck and blessings, for which she receives presents. In German Hungary, the girls choose the prettiest girl to be their Whitsuntide queen, fasten a towering wreath on her brow, and carry her singing through the streets. At every house they stop, sing old ballads, and receive presents. In the southeast of Ireland, on May Day, the prettiest girl used to be chosen queen of the district for 12 months. She was crowned with wild flowers, feasting, dancing, and rustic sports followed, and were closed by a grand procession in the evening. During her year of office she presided over rural gatherings of young people at dances and merrymaking. If she married before the next May Day, her authority was at an end, but her successor was not elected till that day came around. The May Queen is common in France and familiar in England. Again, the spirit of vegetation is sometimes represented by a king and queen, a lord and lady, or a bridegroom and bride. Here again the parallelism holds between the anthropomorphic and the vegetable representation of the tree spirit. For we have seen above that trees are sometimes married to each other. At Halford in South Warwickshire, the children go from house to house on May Day, walking 2 and 2 in procession and headed by a king and queen. 2 boys carry a maypole some 6 or 7 feet high, which is covered with flowers and greenery. Fastened to it near the top are 2 crossbars at right angles to each other. These are also decked with flowers, and from the ends of the bars hang hoops similarly adorned. At the houses the children sing May songs and receive money, which is used to provide tea for them at the schoolhouse in the afternoon. In a Bohemian village near Königgrätz, on Whit Monday, the children play the king's game, at which a king and queen march about under a canopy, the queen wearing a garland, and the youngest girl carrying 2 wreaths on a plate behind them. They are attended by boys and girls called groomsmen and bridesmaids, and they go from house to house collecting gifts. A regular feature in the popular celebration of Whitsuntide in Silesia used to be, and to some extent still is, the contest for the kingship. The contest took various forms, but the mark or goal was generally the May tree or maypole. Sometimes the youth who succeeded in climbing the smooth pole and bringing down the prize was proclaimed the Whitsuntide king, and his sweetheart the Whitsuntide bride. Afterwards the king, carrying the maybush, repaired with the rest of the company to the alehouse, where a dance and feast ended the merrymaking. Often the young farmers and labourers raced on horseback to the maypole, which was adorned with flowers, ribbons, and a crown. He who first reached the pole was the Whitsuntide king, and the rest had to obey his orders for that day. The worst rider became the clown. At the May tree all dismounted and hoisted the king on their shoulders. He nimbly swarmed up the pole and brought down the maybush and the crown, which had been fastened to the top. Meanwhile the clown hurried to the alehouse and proceeded to bolt 30 rolls of bread and to swig 4-quart bottles of brandy with the utmost possible dispatch. He was followed by the king, who bore the maybush and crown at the head of the company. If on their arrival the clown had already disposed of the rolls and the brandy, and greeted the king with a speech and a glass of beer, his score was paid by the king, otherwise he had to settle it himself. After church time the stately procession wound through the village. At the head of it rode the king, decked with flowers and carrying the maybush. Next came the clown with his clothes turned inside out, a great flaxen beard on his chain, and the Whitsuntide crown on his head. 2 riders disguised as guards followed. The procession drew up before every farmyard. The 2 guards dismounted, shut the clown into the house, and claimed a contribution from the housewife to buy soap, with which to wash the clown's beard. Custom allowed them to carry off any victuals which were not under lock and key. Last of all, they came to the house in which the king's sweetheart lived. She was greeted as Whitsuntide Queen and received suitable presents, to wit, a many-colored sash, a cloth, and an apron. The king got as a prize a vest, a neckcloth, and so forth, and had the right of setting up the May bush or Whitsuntide tree before his master's yard, where it remained as an honourable token till the same day next year. Finally the procession took its way to the tavern, where the king and queen opened the dance. Sometimes the Whitsuntide king and queen succeeded to office in a different way. A man of straw, as large as life and crowned with a red cap, was conveyed in a cart, between two men armed and disguised as guards, to a place where a mock court was waiting to try him. A great crowd followed the cart. After a formal trial, the straw man was condemned to death and fastened to a stake on the execution ground. The young men, with bandaged eyes, tried to stab him with a spear. He who succeeded became king, and his sweetheart queen. The straw man was known as the Goliath. In a parish of Denmark, it used to be the custom at Whitsuntide to dress up a little girl as the Whitsun bride and a little boy as her groom. She was decked in all the finery of a grown-up bride, and wore a crown of the freshest flowers of spring on her head. Her groom was as gay as flowers, ribbons, and knots could make him. The other children adorned themselves as best they could with the yellow flowers of the trolleus and kulta. Then they went in great state from farmhouse to farmhouse, two little girls walking at the head of the procession as bridesmaids, and 6 or 8 outriders galloping ahead on hobby horses to announce their coming. Contributions of eggs, butter, loaves, cream, coffee, sugar, and tallow candles were received and conveyed away in baskets. When they had made the round of the farms, some of the farmers' wives helped to arrange the wedding feast, and the children danced merrily in clogs on the stamped clay floor till the sun rose and the birds began to sing. All this is now a thing of the past. Only the old folks still remember the little Whitsun bride and her mimic pomp. We have seen that in Sweden the ceremonies associated elsewhere with May Day or Whitsuntide commonly take place at midsummer. Accordingly, we find that in some parts of the Swedish province of Blekinge they still choose a midsummer's bride, to whom the church coronet is occasionally lent. The girl selects for herself a bridegroom, and a collection is made for the pair, who for the time being are looked on as man and wife. The other youths also choose each his bride. A similar ceremony seems to be still kept up in Norway. In the neighbourhood of Briançon, Dauphiné, on May Day, the lads wrap up in green leaves a young fellow whose sweetheart has deserted him or married another. He lies down on the ground and feigns to be asleep. When a girl who likes him and would marry him comes and wakes him, and raising him up offers him her arm and a flag. So they go to the alehouse, where the pair lead off to dancing. But they must marry within the year, or they are treated as old bachelor and old maid, and are debarred the company of the young folks. The lad is called the bridegroom of the month of May. In the alehouse he puts off his garment of leaves, out of which, mixed with flowers, his partner in the dance makes a nosegay, and wears it at her breast next day, when he leads her again to the alehouse. Like this is a Russian custom observed in the district of Nerikta on the Thursday before Whitsunday. The girls go out into the birchwood, wind a girdle or band round a stately birch, twist its lower branches into a wreath, and kiss each other in pairs through the wreaths. The girls who kiss through the wreath call each other gossips. Then one of the girls steps forward, and mimicking a drunken man, flings herself on the ground, rolls on the grass, and feigns to fall fast asleep. Another girl wakens the pretended sleeper and kisses him. Then the whole bevy trips singing through the wood, to twine garlands, which they throw in the water. In the fate of the garlands floating on the stream they read their own. Here the part of the sleeper was probably at one time played by a lad. In these French and Russian customs we have a forsaken bridegroom, in the following a forsaken bride. On Shrove Tuesday the Slovenes of Oberkrain drag a straw puppet with joyous cries up and down the village. Then they throw it into the water or burn it, and from the height of the flames they judge of the abundance of the next harvest. The noisy crew is followed by a female masker, who drags a great board by a string and gives out that she is a forsaken bride. Viewed in the light of what has gone before, the awakening of the forsaken sleeper in these ceremonies probably represents the revival of vegetation in spring. But it is not easy to assign their respective parts to the forsaken bridegroom and to the girl who wakes him from his slumber. Is the sleeper the leafless forest, or the bare earth of winter? Is the girl who awakens him the fresh verdure, or the genial sunshine of spring? It is hardly possible, on the evidence before us, to answer these questions. In the Highlands of Scotland the revival of vegetation in spring used to be graphically represented on St. Bride's Day, the 1st of February. Thus in the Hebrides the mistress and servants of each family take a sheaf of oats and dress it up in women's apparel, put it in a large basket and lay a wooden club by it, and this they call Breed's bed, and then the mistress and servants cry 3 times, "Breed is come, Breed is welcome." This they do just before going to bed, and when they rise in the morning they look among the ashes, expecting to see the impression of Breed's club there, which if they do, they reckon it a true presage of a good crop and prosperous year, and the contrary they take as an ill omen. The same custom is described by another witness thus: "Upon the night before Candlemas it is usual to make a bed with corn and hay, over which some blankets are laid, in a part of the house near the door. When it is ready, a person goes out and repeats 3 times, 'Bridget, Bridget, come in, thy bed is ready.' 1 or more candles are left burning near it all night. Similarly, in the Isle of Man, on the eve of the 1st of February, a festival was formerly kept, called, in the Manx language, Aloud VideoBook, in honour of the Irish lady who went over to the Isle of Man to receive the veils from Saint Maughold. The custom was to gather a bundle of green rushes, and standing with them in the hand on the threshold of the door, to invite the holy Saint Bridget to come and lodge with them that night. In the Manx language the invitation ran thus: Brede, brede, targis ma tie tardin tie aims nogt fosil je in doris da brede, as lig da brede it heights taig. In English, Bridget, Bridget, come to my house tonight. Open the door for Bridget, and let Bridget come in. After these words were repeated, the rushes were strewn on the floor by way of a carpet or bed for Saint Bridget. A custom very similar to this was also observed in some of the out isles of the ancient kingdom of Man. In these Manx and Highland ceremonies, it is obvious that Saint Bride, or Saint Bridget, is an old heathen goddess of fertility, disguised in a threadbare Christian cloak. Probably she is no other than Brigit, the Celtic goddess of fire, and apparently of the crops. Often the marriage of the spirit of vegetation in spring, though not directly represented, is implied by naming the human representative of the spirit the bride, and dressing her in wedding attire. Thus, in some villages of Altmark at Whitsuntide, while the boys go about carrying a May tree or leading a boy enveloped in leaves and flowers, the girls lead about the May bride, a girl dressed as a bride with a great nosegay in her hair. They go from house to house, the May bride singing a song in which she asks for a present, and tells the inmates of each house that if they give her something they will themselves have something the whole year through, but if they give her nothing they will themselves have nothing. In some parts of Westphalia, 2 girls lead a flower-crowned girl called the Whitsuntide bride from door to door, singing a song in which they ask for eggs. End of chapter 10. Recording by Måns Bro.